r/MaliciousCompliance lifeguard mocked me, so I got him fired with what I overheard. Hey whale, you're doing it wrong again. Jake's voice cut through the chlorinated air like a knife, and I felt my stomach drop to the pool deck. I was mid-stroke when he blew his whistle, the sharp blast echoing off the community center walls. Every head in the pool turned toward me, including the group of kids from my school who'd started coming here after practice. I treaded water, face burning with embarrassment as Jake stood up from his lifeguard chair, that stupid smirk plastered across his face. At 19, he thought he owned this place, and unfortunately, he kind of did. 3 months he'd been working here. 3 months of pure hell for me. Come on up here, kiddo. Let me show everyone the right way to do a freestyle stroke. My heart hammered against my ribs. Not again. Please, not again. But I swam to the edge anyway, because what choice did I have? Jake was the lifeguard, and I was just some 16-year-old who'd been coming to this pool since I was 8. This used to be my sanctuary, the one place where I felt strong and capable. Now it felt like walking into a minefield every time I changed into my swimsuit. See, everyone, Jake announced as I reluctantly climbed out, water dripping onto the warm concrete. This is what happens when you try to swim before you lose the extra weight. Look at that form, like a beached whale trying to get back to sea. Snickers rippled through the group of teenagers lounging on the pool deck. Sarah Martinez from my chemistry class actually pulled out her phone. My whole body went cold despite the summer heat radiating off the pavement. Your stroke is all wrong because you're fighting against your own body, Jake continued, gesturing at me like I was some kind of specimen. You gotta streamline, but that's pretty hard when you're carrying all that extra cargo, right? I wanted to disappear. I wanted to dive back into the pool and swim to the bottom and never come up. 3 months ago, I'd been training for the regional swim meet. I'd been good, really good. But Jake had systematically destroyed every ounce of confidence I'd built up over 8 years of swimming. Maybe try the walking track instead, he suggested with fake concern. Work on the fundamentals before you get back in the water. Just a thought. The worst part wasn't even the humiliation. It was that he was wrong. I knew he was wrong. Coach Peterson had always said my technique was solid, that I had natural rhythm in the water. But standing there in front of everyone, Jake's words felt like truth settling into my bones. I mumbled something about needing to use the bathroom and grabbed my towel, wrapping it around myself like armor. As I walked toward the building, I could hear Jake starting up again with someone else, probably targeting the new kid who'd been trying to learn butterfly stroke. This had to stop. I was so tired of dreading the place that used to be my escape. Tired of Jake's casual cruelty destroying not just my afternoons, but my sleep, my appetite, my entire sense of self-worth. As I pushed through the door to the changing area, something crystallized in my mind. Jake thought he was untouchable, that his little throne as the pool's golden boy lifeguard made him invincible. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I didn't go back out to the pool that day. Instead, I sat in the bathroom stall for 20 minutes, staring at the graffiti door and trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do about Jake. My hands were still shaking from the humiliation, and every time I replayed his comments about my body, I felt that familiar twist of shame in my gut. The thing was, complaining to management felt hopeless. Jake was their star employee, the one who looked good in the red swim trunks, who flirted with the moms during Adult Swim, who could actually save someone if they were drowning. I was just a member, and not even an adult member who paid the full fees. My parents had gotten me the teen summer pass, which basically made me bottom of the food chain. When I finally worked up the courage to leave the bathroom, the afternoon crowd had started filtering in. I kept my head down, planning to grab my stuff from the locker and just go home. Maybe I'd tell my parents I was getting bored with swimming. Maybe I'd make up some excuse about wanting to focus on other things before school started. But as I passed the lifeguard office, I heard Jake's voice through the partially open door, and something in his tone made me stop. He wasn't using his public performance voice, that fake friendly tone he put on for parents and pool managers. This was different. Quieter. More serious. Moving about 20 pounds a week now, he was saying to someone. The markup is insane, dude. People will pay anything for the good stuff. I pressed myself against the wall, heart suddenly racing for a completely different reason. Through the crack in the door, I could see Jake talking to Marcus, the other lifeguard who worked weekday shifts. Marcus looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I don't know, man, Marcus was saying. Seems risky. What if Thompson finds out? Thompson was the pool manager, a stern woman in her 50s who ran this place like a military operation. She definitely wasn't someone you wanted to cross. Jake laughed, and there was something ugly in the sound. Thompson's clueless. She barely checks the supply room inventory. I've been skimming chlorine, pH strips, those expensive algacides, she has no idea. And even if she notices some shrinkage, she'll blame it on sloppy measuring or theft from the outside. My mouth went dry. Jake was stealing from the pool. Actually stealing. The beauty is, Jake continued, I know exactly what these pool maintenance guys need because I work with the chemicals every day. They're paying me 20% over retail because I can get them the premium stuff. It's like printing money. But what if? What if nothing, Marcus? I've got this system down to a science. Take a little here, a little there. Never enough to trigger an audit. And who's gonna suspect the lifeguard who's dating Thompson's niece? Wait. Jake was dating the pool manager's niece? No wonder he acted like he was untouchable. No wonder my complaints would fall on deaf ears. I heard chair legs scraping against the floor and quickly moved away from the door, pretending to study the community announcements board. A few seconds later, Marcus emerged, looking troubled. He nodded at me absently and headed back toward the pool deck. Jake's voice carried from inside the office as he made what sounded like a phone call. Hey, it's Jake. Yeah, I can get you that order by Thursday. Same spot as usual. I stood there staring at a flyer for water aerobics classes, my mind racing. Jake thought he was so smart, so untouchable. He'd spent 3 months making my life miserable, destroying my confidence piece by piece, because he thought there was nothing I could do about it. But now I had something. Something that could destroy him just like he destroyed me. The question was, did I have the guts to use it? I spent the next 3 days obsessing over what I'd heard, replaying Jake's conversation in my head until I could recite it word for word. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smug face as he talked about his system, how he had it all figured out. The same confidence he wore when he humiliated me in front of everyone. But knowing something and proving it were two completely different things. I tried to research what I'd need for evidence, screenshots of texts, photos of him taking supplies, maybe even a recording of him admitting to the theft. But Jake wasn't stupid, just arrogant. He kept his phone locked down tight, and the supply room was in a part of the building I wasn't supposed to access. Plus, I'd learned that one-party consent recording laws in our state were complicated, and the last thing I needed was to get myself in legal trouble while trying to expose him. The worst part was that I still had to see him every day. My parents had paid for the full summer pass, and they'd already started asking why I wasn't swimming as much. "You were so excited about this pool membership," Mom had said over dinner. "Are you feeling okay? You seem different lately." Different. Yeah, that was one way to put it. 3 months of systematic humiliation had definitely made me different. So I kept going back, trying to act normal while I figured out my next move. But Jake seemed to sense something had shifted. On Thursday, when I was doing laps during the less crowded morning session, he actually got down from his chair and walked along the pool edge, matching my pace. "You know," he called out as I swam, "I've been thinking about what I said the other day. Maybe I was a little harsh." I stopped mid-stroke, treading water and staring at him in confusion. "Jake? Apologizing? This had to be some kind of setup." "I mean," he continued, crouching down closer to the water, "you're not that bad of a swimmer. Just need some work on your technique. Maybe some private lessons." The way he said private lessons made my skin crawl. There was something predatory in his smile, like he was testing me somehow. Had he seen me near the office? Did he know I'd overheard something? "I'm fine," I managed to say, swimming toward the ladder. "Thanks anyway." But Jake moved to block my exit from the pool, his hand casually resting on the ladder rail. "Come on, don't be like that. I'm trying to help you here. One-on-one instruction, after hours when it's just us. I could really help you improve." My blood turned to ice water. The pool after hours. Just me and Jake. Everything about this felt wrong, felt dangerous. But I was trapped in the water with nowhere to go, and he was looming over me with that same fake concerned expression he always wore when adults were watching. I said, "I'm fine," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake's smile faltered for just a second, and I saw something flash in his eyes. Anger, maybe. Or suspicion. "Suit yourself," he said, finally moving away from the ladder. "But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." As I climbed out of the pool, legs shaking, I realized the situation had just become a lot more complicated. It wasn't just about Jake stealing supplies anymore. There was something else going on here, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I needed help. Real help. And I needed it fast. That night, I barely slept. Jake's offer of private lessons kept echoing in my head, and every time I thought about the predatory way he'd smiled, I felt sick. But it also crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about getting revenge for 3 months of humiliation anymore. Jake was escalating, and I had a horrible feeling I wasn't his only target. I decided to start paying closer attention to how he interacted with other swimmers, especially the younger ones. What I discovered over the next few days made my stomach churn. There was Amy, a 13-year-old who just joined the swim team. Jake always seemed to find excuses to correct her stroke technique, his hands lingering too long on her shoulders and back during demonstrations. When her mom wasn't watching, his comments about her developing form made her visibly uncomfortable. Then there was David, a quiet 15-year-old who came in every morning before the crowds arrived. Jake had been giving him the same treatment he'd given me, constant criticism disguised as helpful instruction, gradually chipping away at his confidence. I watched Jake corner him by the equipment shed yesterday, standing way too close while David pressed himself against the wall, looking terrified. The pattern was becoming clear, and it was worse than just stealing pool chemicals. Jake was systematically targeting vulnerable kids, isolating them, breaking them down. And his position as the favorite lifeguard, protected by his relationship with Thompson's niece, made him basically untouchable. But then, on Friday afternoon, everything changed. I was in the locker room when I heard raised voices coming from the pool manager's office. The walls were thin, and Miss Thompson's voice carried clearly through the ventilation system. "Third complaint this month, Jake. Mrs. Henderson says you made inappropriate comments about her daughter's swimsuit." My heart started pounding. Someone else had complained. Finally. "Come on, Linda," Jake's voice was smooth, confident. "You know how these helicopter parents are." Caitlin was wearing a bikini that was barely legal for a public pool. I was just doing my job, maintaining dress code standards. "That's not what Mrs. Henderson said. She said you told her 14-year-old daughter that she was filling out nicely and asked if she needed help adjusting her straps." There was a pause. When Jake spoke again, his voice had an edge to it. "Look, Linda, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You know I'm dating your niece, right? Jessica and I are pretty serious. Why would I jeopardize that by hitting on some kid? That's exactly why this is so concerning, Jake. Jessica thinks the world of you, and these complaints are from bored suburban moms who have nothing better to do than cause drama. Come on, you know me better than that." I heard Ms. Thompson sigh heavily. "Jake, I want to believe you, I really do. But I can't ignore multiple complaints. I'm going to have to write this up, Ann. Linda." Jake's voice dropped lower, and something in his tone made me press closer to the vent. "Let's think about this logically. You write me up, it goes on my permanent record, affects my college applications. Is that really fair based on some gossip from parents who don't like that I maintain discipline around here? It's not gossip when 3 different families. 3 families who probably coordinate their complaints in their little mom Facebook groups. Look, I've been thinking about proposing to Jessica after she graduates. You really want to torpedo your future nephew-in-law's career over this?" The silence stretched so long I wondered if they'd left the office. Finally, Miss Thompson spoke, and her voice sounded tired, defeated. "Fine. But Jake, I'm serious. No more situations like this. Keep your interactions with members strictly professional. Of course. You have my word. I slumped against the locker, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Jake had just manipulated his way out of multiple harassment complaints by leveraging his relationship with Thompson's niece and playing the victim. Those parents had been brave enough to speak up, and it hadn't mattered at all. But as I sat there in the stuffy locker room, listening to Jake's footsteps retreating down the hallway, I realized something important. Ms. Thompson wasn't protecting Jake because she wanted to. She was protecting him because she felt trapped by family politics. Which meant I needed to give her a way out that had nothing to do with harassment complaints or he-said-she-said situations. I needed to give her cold, hard evidence of something she couldn't ignore or rationalize away. It was time to catch Jake in the act. The next Monday, I put my plan into motion. I'd spent the entire weekend mapping out Jake's routine, studying when he accessed the supply room and figuring out the best vantage points to watch without being seen. The community center had security cameras, but they were old and poorly positioned, mostly focused on the main entrances and the pool deck itself. I arrived early, before the morning swim session started, and positioned myself in the family changing area where I had a clear view of the hallway leading to the supply room. My hands were sweating as I pretended to organize my swim bag, checking my phone's camera every few minutes to make sure it was ready. At 7:23 a.m., right on schedule, Jake emerged from the lifeguard office carrying his usual clipboard and keys. But instead of heading to the pool deck for opening duties, he veered toward the restricted hallway. My heart hammered as I watched him unlock the supply room door and disappear inside. This was it. I crept closer, staying low behind the vending machines, and positioned myself where I could see through the supply room's small window. Jake was moving efficiently, like he'd done this 100 times before. He pulled out what looked like a large duffel bag from behind some equipment and started loading it with containers of pool chemicals. I raised my phone, hands shaking as I tried to get a clear shot through the window. But just as I pressed record, disaster struck. Hey! What are you doing back here? I spun around to find Marcus, the other lifeguard, staring at me with confusion and suspicion. In my panic, I fumbled my phone, and it clattered loudly against the tile floor. I was just looking for the bathroom, I stammered, scrambling to pick up my phone. The screen was cracked, but it still seemed to work. Marcus frowned, glancing toward the supply room. The bathrooms are clearly marked on the other side of the building. You're not supposed to be in this area. Through the supply room window, I could see Jake had frozen, a container of chlorine in his hands. Our eyes met through the glass, and his expression shifted from surprise to something much more dangerous. Sorry, I got turned around, I said quickly, backing away from Marcus. I'll just. The supply room door burst open, and Jake stepped out, his face a mask of controlled fury. The duffel bag was nowhere to be seen, probably shoved back into its hiding spot the moment he heard voices. Well, Jake said, his voice deceptively calm. Our little swim enthusiast seems to have wandered into the wrong area. Again. Marcus looked between us, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding it. I found them lurking by the supply room with their phone out. Jake's eyes fixed on my cracked phone screen, and I saw his jaw clench. Is that so? You know, kiddo, I'm starting to think you might be the one causing some of our inventory discrepancies. Always hanging around where you don't belong, watching people. My blood went cold. He was setting me up, trying to flip the narrative before I could expose him. I wasn't doing anything wrong, I said, but my voice came out weak and defensive. Marcus, Jake said smoothly, I think we need to have a conversation with Ms. Thompson about some suspicious behavior we've been noticing. Kids these days think they can get away with anything. Marcus nodded slowly, still looking confused but trusting Jake's lead. Should I call her now? Let's give our young friend here a chance to explain themselves first, Jake said, stepping closer to me. After all, I'm sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation for why they're sneaking around restricted areas with their camera out, right? I was trapped. If I tried to explain what I was really doing, I'd have to admit I was trying to catch Jake stealing, which would force me to reveal what I'd overheard. But without concrete evidence, it would just be my word against his, and we all knew how that would go. Jake seemed to read my thoughts, because his smile turned predatory. Cat got your tongue. That's okay. Why don't we all head to Ms. Thompson's office and sort this out properly? As he gestured for me to walk ahead of them, I realized I'd just made everything infinitely worse. Not only had I failed to get evidence against Jake, I'd walked right into his trap. And now he knew I was onto him. The walk to Ms. Thompson's office felt like a death march. Jake stayed right behind me, close enough that I could feel his presence like a physical weight. Marcus walked beside us, still looking confused but clearly buying into Jake's narrative that I was some kind of troublemaker. My mind raced through every possible explanation I could give Ms. Thompson that wouldn't sound completely insane. I was trying to catch your star lifeguard stealing pool chemicals based on a conversation I overheard wasn't exactly going to fly, especially when Jake had already planted the seed that I might be the actual thief. Linda. Jake knocked on the pool manager's office door with fake concern dripping from his voice. Sorry to bother you, but we have a situation that needs your attention. Ms. Thompson looked up from her paperwork, her expression immediately shifting to annoyance when she saw me flanked by both lifeguards. What's going on now? Marcus found our young swimmer here lurking around the supply room with their phone out, Jake said, settling into the chair across from her desk like he owned the place. Given some of the inventory issues we've been having, I thought you should know. My stomach dropped. Inventory issues, he was already laying the groundwork to blame the theft on me. Ms. Thompson's eyes narrowed as she looked at me. Is this true? What were you doing in a restricted area? I got lost looking for the bathroom, I said weakly, knowing how pathetic it sounded. The bathrooms are clearly marked, Marcus added helpfully. And they definitely had their phone out like they were taking pictures or something. Pictures. Ms. Thompson's voice sharpened. Of what, exactly? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I possibly say that wouldn't make this worse? Jake leaned forward with practiced concern. Linda, I hate to say this, but we've noticed some patterns. This kid's always hanging around where they shouldn't be, watching the staff, acting secretive. And now Marcus catches them with their phone out by our chemical storage. That's not what happened, I finally managed to say, but even I could hear how unconvincing I sounded. Ms. Thompson rubbed her temples like she was getting a headache. Show me your phone. My blood turned to ice. What? Your phone. If you were just lost, there shouldn't be any photos of our facility on there, right? Jake's smile was barely contained. He knew I was cornered. If I refused to show my phone, it would look like I was hiding something. But if I showed it, she'd see all the times I tried to document Jake's routine, all my failed attempts to gather evidence. It's broken, I said, holding up my cracked screen. It fell when Marcus startled me. Convenient, Jake murmured, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Ms. Thompson stood up, her patience clearly exhausted. Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm tired of dealing with complaints and drama and now this. Maybe it's time we had a conversation with your parents about appropriate behavior at community facilities. The threat hit like a physical blow. If she called my parents, I'd have to explain why I was sneaking around the pool, which meant revealing Jake's harassment, which would lead to more he said she said drama that Jake would easily manipulate his way out of. Please, I said desperately. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just. Just what? Ms. Thompson demanded. I looked at Jake, saw the triumph in his eyes, and realized he'd orchestrated this perfectly. He'd caught me trying to expose him and turned it into evidence of my own guilt. Now I looked like a liar and a potential thief, while he came across as the responsible employee just trying to protect the facility. But as I sat there drowning in the suffocating silence of that office, something shifted inside me. Jake thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully flipped the script and buried me. He had no idea that this conversation was being recorded by the facility's security system, and that his smug overconfidence was about to become his biggest mistake. I stared at the small security camera mounted in the corner of Ms. Thompson's office, a desperate idea forming in my mind. If the system recorded audio, then Jake's smug admissions might actually work in my favor, but only if I could get him to repeat them. You know what, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, maybe Jake's right. Maybe I have been acting suspicious lately. Everyone in the room went quiet. Jake's eyebrows shot up, clearly not expecting me to agree with him. I continued, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could all hear it. I have been watching the staff pretty carefully. Because I've been wondering about some things. Ms. Thompson leaned back in her chair. What kind of things? This was it. My one shot to get Jake to incriminate himself while the security camera was rolling. Well, like how some of the pool chemicals seem to disappear faster than they should. And how certain staff members seem to have a lot more money than you'd expect from a lifeguard salary. Jake's face went pale, then flushed red. Are you seriously trying to? I'm just saying what I've observed, I cut him off, gaining confidence. Like expensive new sneakers, designer sunglasses. Makes a person wonder about second jobs and side hustles. That's enough, Jake snapped, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. You don't know anything about my finances or my life. Don't I? I pressed, watching his hands clench into fists. Because I've heard some interesting conversations lately about moving product, about markups and premium supplies. Marcus's head whipped toward Jake, his face suddenly understanding. Wait, you mean that thing you were talking about? Shut up, Marcus, Jake snarled, all pretense of professionalism gone now. Ms. Thompson was looking between all of us like she was watching a tennis match. What thing? What conversations? I saw my opening and took it. The conversation about selling chemicals to pool maintenance companies. About skimming from the supply room inventory. About how you'd never get caught because Ms. Thompson barely checks the stock levels. You little, Jake started to rise from his chair, his face twisted with rage. Jake, sit down, Ms. Thompson's voice cut through the tension like a whip. Right now. The authority in her tone made Jake freeze halfway out of his seat. His eyes darted between me and his boss, and I could practically see him trying to calculate his way out of this. Linda, this is ridiculous, he said, forcing his voice back to that smooth, confident tone. You're going to take the word of some troubled kid who's been acting erratically for weeks. They're obviously making things up to deflect from whatever they were really doing by the supply room. But Ms. Thompson wasn't looking at Jake anymore. She was staring at Marcus, whose face had gone sheet white. Marcus, what conversation were they referring to? Marcus glanced at Jake, then at the floor, then back at Ms. Thompson. I don't think I should. Marcus, Ms. Thompson's voice was deadly quiet. What conversation? The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I could see sweat beading on Jake's forehead despite the air conditioning. His leg was bouncing nervously, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely scared. Look, Jake said finally, even if I did have some side business selling pool supplies, which I'm not saying I do, it wouldn't necessarily involve this facility's inventory. There are lots of ways to source chemicals wholesale. Ms. Thompson's expression shifted to something I'd never seen before. Pure, cold fury. So you are admitting to running an unauthorized business using knowledge gained from your employment here? Jake realized his mistake immediately. No, I said even if I was, which I'm not. Get out, Ms. Thompson said quietly. What? Get out of my office. Now. We'll finish this conversation tomorrow when I've had time to conduct a full inventory audit. Jake's face went through several color changes as the reality of his situation sank in. His eyes found mine, and the hatred there was so intense I actually flinched. He was going down, and we both knew it. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I barely slept, replaying the confrontation in Ms. Thompson's office over and over. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jake's face twisted with rage, the way he'd looked at me like he wanted to destroy me completely. But when I arrived at the pool the next morning, Jake was there. He was sitting in his lifeguard chair like nothing had happened, sunglasses on, whistle around his neck, acting like he owned the place. My stomach dropped to my shoes. Had Ms. Thompson's audit found nothing? Had Jake somehow covered his tracks? Well, Jake called out as I hesitated by the pool entrance. If it isn't our little detective. Come for another swimming lesson. There were only a few other people around, some early morning lap swimmers who probably hadn't heard him. But his tone made my skin crawl. There was something different about it, something darker than his usual public mockery. I tried to ignore him and headed toward my usual lane, but Jake's voice followed me. You know, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, he said, loud enough for others to hear. About appropriate behavior and boundaries. Really got me reflecting on pool safety. I dove into the water, hoping to escape whatever game he was playing, but Jake stood up from his chair and walked along the pool edge, matching my pace as I swam. Safety's so important, he continued, his voice carrying over the water. Especially for swimmers who might be unstable. Unpredictable. The kind who might have episodes in the water. I stopped swimming and treaded water, staring at him in disbelief. Was he threatening me? What are you talking about? I managed to say. Jake crouched down by the pool edge, bringing his face closer to mine. Behind his sunglasses, I could see his eyes were bloodshot, like he hadn't slept either. Just thinking out loud about liability issues. What happens when someone makes false accusations against staff? Creates hostile environments. Makes other swimmers uncomfortable. My blood went cold. He was setting up some kind of narrative to get me banned from the pool. Sometimes, Jake continued, the safest thing is to remove problematic individuals before they hurt themselves or others. For everyone's protection. Jake. Ms. Thompson's voice cut across the pool deck like a blade. I'd never been so relieved to hear anyone in my life. Jake straightened up, his fake concerned expression sliding back into place, but I could see tension in every line of his body. Oh, hey Linda. Just doing my job, keeping an eye on pool safety. Ms. Thompson walked over to us, and I noticed she wasn't alone. A man in a security uniform followed behind her, along with someone I didn't recognize carrying what looked like official paperwork. Jake, I need you to step away from the pool area, Ms. Thompson said. Her voice was steady, but there was steel underneath it. What? Why? Jake's confident mask was starting to slip. I'm scheduled to work until. The inventory audit is complete, Ms. Thompson interrupted. We found some significant discrepancies that need to be addressed immediately. Jake's face went white. Discrepancies? What kind of discrepancies? The man with the paperwork stepped forward. Mr. Morrison, I'm Detective Rivera. We'd like to ask you some questions about missing inventory from this facility. The word detective hit the pool deck like a bomb. The few other swimmers had stopped their laps and were staring openly now. Jake looked around wildly, like he was calculating whether he could somehow run. This is insane, Jake said, his voice cracking slightly. I don't know anything about missing inventory. Linda, tell them this is crazy. But Ms. Thompson wasn't looking at him with family loyalty anymore. She was looking at him like he was a stranger who betrayed her trust in the worst possible way. Jake, you need to come with us, Detective Rivera said firmly. Now. As they escorted Jake away from the pool, he turned back to look at me one last time. Even from a distance, even with his world crashing down around him, the hatred in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't over. But it was over. At least, I thought it was. For the first time in 3 months, I had the pool to myself without Jake's constant surveillance and humiliation. The replacement lifeguard was a quiet college girl named Sam who mostly read textbooks and only blew her whistle for actual safety violations. I could swim my laps in peace, work on my strokes without commentary, exist in the water without feeling like prey. The relief was so intense it was almost physical, like I'd been holding my breath underwater for months and could finally surface. Word spread quickly through the community center grapevine. Jake had been arrested for theft, the investigation was expanding to include potential charges of harassment and creating a hostile environment, and MS. Thompson was facing questions from the city council about her oversight of staff. Parents were coming forward with complaints they'd been too intimidated to make before, and suddenly everyone had a story about Jake's inappropriate behavior. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like justice was finally being served. Instead, I felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. You did the right thing, my mom said when the story finally came out at dinner. That boy was bullying you, and stealing from his workplace. His poor parents must be mortified. But I couldn't shake the memory of Jake's expression as they led him away. The promise of retaliation burning in his eyes. I'd learned enough about Jake over the past 3 months to know he wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. My paranoia seemed justified when weird things started happening around the 4th day after his arrest. First, it was my bike. I'd locked it in the same spot outside the community center that I'd used all summer, but when I came out after swimming, both tires were flat. Not punctured, just completely deflated, like someone had let all the air out. The maintenance guy said it was probably just old valves, but the timing felt too convenient. Then my locker started being tampered with. Nothing was stolen, but my combination lock would be turned to random numbers, my clothes would be rearranged, my swim bag moved to different shelves. Little things that could be explained away as forgetfulness or coincidence, but that left me constantly on edge. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. I'd be swimming laps and catch glimpses of someone standing by the fence outside, just barely visible through the windows. When I'd look directly, no one was there. I'd hear footsteps following me in the parking lot, but when I turned around, it was empty. Cars would idle outside my house in the evening, engines running but no one getting out. You're being paranoid, I told myself. Jake was in jail, or at least tied up with legal proceedings. He had bigger problems than harassing some 16-year-old who'd helped expose his crimes. But then I found the note. It was tucked under my windshield wipers after Thursday's swim session, folded into a small square and wedged so tightly I almost missed it. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the paper and read the message written in block letters. Snitches get stitches. This isn't over. I looked around the parking lot frantically, but there were only a few other cars and no sign of whoever had left it. The paper looked like it had been torn from a standard notebook, the kind you could buy at any store. The handwriting was deliberately disguised, but something about the angry slashes of the letters felt familiar. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hope you're enjoying your victory lap. Don't get too comfortable. This was insane. Jake was supposed to be dealing with criminal charges, court dates, probably lawyer meetings. How was he finding time to stalk me? And more importantly, how was he getting close enough to mess with my stuff without anyone noticing? Unless it wasn't Jake at all. Unless someone else had decided I needed to be taught a lesson. The realization hit me like ice water. Marcus. Marcus had been in that office when everything went down. Marcus had seen Jake get arrested, watched his friend's life implode because of what I'd exposed. And Marcus still worked at the pool. I'd been so focused on Jake as the threat that I completely overlooked his loyal sidekick who had full access to the facility, knew my schedule, and probably felt like I destroyed his mentor. My hands were still trembling as I drove home, checking my rearview mirror obsessively. Every car behind me felt suspicious, every turn they made seemed coordinated with mine. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was convinced I was losing my mind. But when I got to my room and really looked at that note again, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. In the bottom right corner, barely visible, was a small doodle of a whistle. The same whistle design that Marcus always drew on his schedule sheets when he was bored during slow shifts. I grabbed my laptop and started researching everything I could find about the arrests. Local news had covered the story, but they only mentioned Jake. Nothing about other employees being investigated, nothing about Marcus facing any consequences. He was still working, still had his position of authority, still had access to member information. Including my address, my parents' names, my schedule. The next morning, I almost didn't go to the pool. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the building and trying to work up the courage to go inside. But I couldn't let fear win again. I'd just gotten my safe space back, I wasn't going to let Jake's friend take it away from me. Sam was working the early shift, which should have made me feel better. But when I checked in at the front desk, the clerk mentioned that Marcus would be covering the afternoon session. Thought you should know since you two had that incident the other day, she said casually. He seemed pretty upset about the whole Jake situation. Kept asking when you usually come in for your swims. My stomach dropped. He was asking about my schedule. Yeah, said he wanted to make sure there weren't any more misunderstandings or conflicts. Seemed really concerned about keeping things professional. Professional. Right. Like leaving threatening notes was professional behavior. I managed to get through my morning laps, but every shadow at the edge of my vision made me flinch. When I was changing back into street clothes, I heard the main door to the locker room slam shut, followed by the distinct sound of a lock clicking. Hello. I called out, my voice echoing off the tile walls. Someone there. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving closer to the changing area where I was trapped with half my clothes still in my hands. You know, Marcus's voice drifted around the corner, Jake always said you were trouble. Said you had this way of watching people, gathering information, waiting for the right moment to strike. I pressed myself against the lockers, frantically pulling my shirt over my head. The exit was around the corner, past where Marcus was standing, and there was no other way out. Marcus, I don't want any trouble, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was just destroying people's lives. His footsteps stopped right outside the changing stalls. Jake's facing felony charges because of you. His whole future is ruined. His relationship with Jessica is over. His family won't even take his calls. I could hear him breathing heavily, could feel the rage radiating through the thin partition between us. And you just get to swim around like nothing happened, like you didn't ruin everything. The handle of my changing stall door rattled as he tested it. Thank God I'd locked it, but the cheap mechanism wouldn't hold for long if he really wanted in. My phone had no signal in the concrete building. I was completely alone with Jake's angry friend, and no one knew where I was. The stall door rattled again, more violently this time, and I heard Marcus curse under his breath. I was trapped like an animal in a cage, clutching my swim bag and trying to figure out if there was any way to get past him to the exit. You think you're so smart, Marcus continued, his voice getting closer to the door. But you have no idea what you've done. Jake wasn't just my coworker, he was helping me get into the Lifeguard certification program at State. Had connections with the swim team coach. Now that's all gone because some spoiled brat couldn't handle a little criticism. A little criticism. That's what they called 3 months of systematic humiliation and harassment. My fears started mixing with anger, and maybe that was exactly what I needed. Jake was stealing, I said loudly, surprising myself with how strong my voice sounded. And he was harassing kids. What he got was justice, not revenge. The rattling stopped abruptly, and for a moment there was complete silence. Then Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Justice? You want to talk about justice? Let me tell you about justice. His voice moved away from the door, and I heard him pacing. Justice would be you experiencing what it feels like to have your reputation destroyed. To have people look at you like you're guilty of something just because of who you associate with. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely think straight, but I forced myself to listen carefully to his movements. He seemed to be moving toward the main area of the locker room, maybe checking the exit or looking for something. You know what the best part is? Marcus called out, his voice echoing off the walls. Management thinks I'm the victim here too. Poor Marcus, led astray by that bad influence Jake. They're being extra nice to me, giving me more hours, more responsibility. And I have access to all the member files now. The implication hit me like a physical blow. He could get my address, my parents' information, my entire schedule. He probably already had. I know you live on Maple Street, Marcus continued, confirming my worst fears. Know your parents work late on Thursdays. Know your little sister gets home from day camp around 3:30. My blood turned to ice. He was threatening my family now. This had gone way beyond harassment, this was stalking, intimidation, possibly worse. I heard the sound of metal scraping against concrete, like he was dragging something heavy. Then the distinct squeak of the maintenance cart wheels. You see, the thing about pool maintenance, Marcus said conversationally, is that we use some pretty serious chemicals. Muriatic acid for pH balance. Sodium hypochlorite for disinfection. Calcium hypochlorite for shock treatments. All perfectly normal, perfectly legal pool supplies. The implication in his tone made me feel sick. He was talking about chemicals like they were weapons. Course, accidents happen all the time around pools, he continued. Chemical spills, equipment malfunctions. Sometimes people get hurt when they're somewhere they shouldn't be, doing things they shouldn't be doing. I could hear him moving closer again, the cart squeaking with each step. Whatever he had planned, I couldn't just wait in this stall for him to make his move. But the moment I opened that door, I'd be completely exposed with nowhere to run. My hands were shaking as I quietly dug through my swim bag, looking for anything that could serve as a weapon or distraction. My fingers closed around something hard and plastic, my emergency whistle, the one my parents had insisted I carry after hearing about Jake's arrest. It wasn't much, but it might be my only chance to call for help. The cart stopped right outside my stall, and Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Time to come out and face the consequences of your choices. The door handle rattled violently as Marcus tried to force it open. I gripped the emergency whistle, my palms so sweaty I could barely hold onto it. The cheap lock wouldn't last much longer under his assault. Come on, don't make this harder than it needs to be, Marcus said, his voice sickeningly calm now. We just need to have a conversation about respect and consequences. I heard the unmistakable sound of liquid sloshing in a container. My stomach clenched as I realized he'd brought chemicals from his maintenance cart. The sharp smell of chlorine was already starting to seep under the door. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, voices in the hallway outside the locker room. Told you the pool hours changed today, a woman was saying. They're doing maintenance on the filtration system. Marcus went completely silent. I could practically feel him listening, calculating whether these people would come in or just pass by. The voices were getting closer. Excuse me, another voice called out, a man's voice, authoritative. Is someone in there? The locker room is supposed to be closed for cleaning. I didn't hesitate. I blew the whistle as hard as I could, the shrill sound echoing off the tile walls like a fire alarm. Again and again, the piercing noise filling the space. Help. I screamed between whistle blasts. Someone help me. Marcus cursed violently, and I heard the cartwheels squeaking as he tried to move away from my stall. But it was too late, the locker room door burst open, and multiple voices flooded in. What the hell is going on in here? Call security. Now. Someone's trapped in that stall. I kept blowing the whistle and screaming until I heard Marcus's voice, suddenly smooth and professional again, thank God you're here. I heard someone screaming and came to check. I think they're having some kind of panic attack. Step away from that door, the authoritative voice commanded. Right now. Of course, just trying to help. I said step away. Ma'am, are you hurt? Can you open the door? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the lock, but I managed to get the stall door open. A security guard and two other adults, a man and woman in maintenance uniforms, stood facing Marcus, who had positioned himself next to his cart with an expression of confused concern. He was trying to get into my stall, I said, my voice cracking. He locked the locker room door, he was threatening me. That's not what happened, Marcus interrupted smoothly. I heard screaming and came to investigate. The door was already locked, probably an automatic security feature. I was just trying to make sure she was okay. The security guard looked between us, clearly trying to assess the situation. Miss, why were you in a closed locker room? My heart sank. Of course they'd question my story. Marcus looked calm and professional in his staff uniform, while I probably looked hysterical and paranoid. I was swimming during normal hours, I said desperately. I was changing when he locked me in and started threatening me. Check the security cameras. The cameras in the locker rooms were disconnected for privacy during the maintenance period, Marcus said helpfully. Standard protocol. Of course they were. Marcus had planned this perfectly, just like Jake had planned his thefts. But unlike Jake, Marcus hadn't gotten overconfident and sloppy. Look, Marcus continued, this is probably just a misunderstanding. She's been under a lot of stress lately with the whole Jake situation. Maybe we should call her parents, get her some help. He was painting me as an unstable kid having a breakdown, and I could see it was working. The security guard's expression had shifted from concern to skepticism, and the maintenance workers were nodding like Marcus's explanation made perfect sense. But then the woman in the maintenance uniform stepped closer to Marcus's cart and frowned. Why do you have muriatic acid on a cleaning cart? She asked. That's not standard for locker room maintenance. Marcus's perfect composure flickered for just a second, but it was enough. The maintenance woman stepped closer to Marcus's cart, her frown deepening as she examined the chemical containers. This is all wrong, she said, pulling out her phone. These chemicals aren't supposed to be mixed together, and definitely not in a confined space like this. Marcus's carefully controlled expression finally cracked. There was a spill earlier. I was cleaning up. Bullshit, the security guard interrupted, suddenly very interested in the cart's contents. I've been doing pool security for 15 years. You don't transport muriatic acid and chlorine products together unless you want to create chlorine gas. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone in that locker room understood what Marcus had been planning, and there was no way to talk his way out of it now. You need to step away from that cart immediately, the security guard ordered, his hand moving to his radio. And put your hands where I can see them. But Marcus wasn't done fighting. In one fluid motion, he grabbed one of the chemical containers and held it like a weapon. Everyone just calm down, he said, backing toward the emergency exit. Nobody needs to get hurt here. Except me, right? I found my voice again, anger overriding my fear. You were going to hurt me with those chemicals because you couldn't handle the fact that your precious mentor was a criminal and a predator. Jake wasn't a predator. Marcus snarled, all pretense of calm professionalism gone now. He was trying to help you losers improve yourselves. But you were too sensitive, too entitled to handle constructive criticism. The security guard was speaking quietly into his radio while keeping his eyes locked on Marcus. We need police backup at the community center. Possible assault with a chemical weapon. Suspect is armed and blocking exits. Marcus heard this and his face twisted with desperation. He was trapped, and we all knew it. But cornered people do unpredictable things, and he still had those chemicals. This is all your fault, he said, focusing on me with the same hatred I'd seen in Jake's eyes. Everything that's happened, Jake's arrest, the investigation, all the complaints coming forward, it all traces back to you. You destroyed everything. No, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Jake destroyed everything when he chose to steal and harass people. You're destroying your own life by choosing to threaten me instead of accepting reality. The maintenance woman had quietly moved to block the other exit while Marcus was focused on our argument. He was effectively surrounded now, but that just made him more dangerous. You think you're so smart, Marcus said, his grip tightening on the chemical container. But you have no idea how many people you've hurt. Jake's girlfriend Jessica. She's been getting harassment at school because people found out she was dating him. His younger brother got kicked off the swim team because coaches don't want to be associated with the family name. I felt a stab of guilt at that. I hadn't thought about the ripple effects on Jake's family members who might be innocent. But then I remembered Amy's uncomfortable face when Jake touched her shoulders, David pressed against the wall looking terrified, and my own months of systematic humiliation. That's not my fault, I said firmly. That's the consequence of Jake's choices. Marcus's face contorted with rage, and for a terrifying moment I thought he was going to throw the chemicals at me anyway, consequences be damned. That's when we heard the sirens getting closer, and Marcus's expression shifted from rage to something that looked almost like relief. He was finally going to face the consequences of his own choices. The police arrived like a small army, 3 patrol cars, an ambulance, and what looked like a hazmat team. Through the locker room's small windows, I could see red and blue lights painting the community center walls in chaotic patterns. Marcus had gone completely still when the sirens got close, the chemical container still clutched in his white-knuckled grip. The security guard kept his distance but never took his eyes off him, while the maintenance workers flanked the exits like they'd done this before. Put the container down slowly, Officer Martinez said as she entered with 2 other cops. She had her hand near her weapon but wasn't pointing it yet, a professional calm that somehow made everything feel more real and more terrifying at the same time. I wasn't going to actually use it, Marcus said, but his voice cracked on the words. I just wanted to scare her. Make her understand what she'd done. By threatening chemical burns. The maintenance woman's voice was sharp with disbelief. Do you have any idea what muriatic acid does to skin? Marcus's face crumpled, and for the first time since this nightmare started, he looked like what he actually was, a 19-year-old kid who'd gotten in way over his head. I didn't think it through. I was just so angry about Jake, about everything falling apart. But Officer Martinez wasn't interested in his excuses. Sir, I need you to place the container on the ground and step away from it. Now. The next few minutes felt like they happened in slow motion. Marcus finally set down the chemical container with shaking hands. The hazmat team moved in to secure the dangerous substances while Marcus was handcuffed and read his rights. I had to give my statement 3 separate times to different officers, each one asking slightly different questions about Marcus's threats and behavior. We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow for a formal interview, Officer Martinez explained as the ambulance crew checked me over for chemical exposure. And we'll want to review any security footage from the past week to document the stalking behavior you described. My parents arrived just as they were loading Marcus into the patrol car, and seeing their panicked faces made everything hit me at once. My mom wrapped me in a crushing hug while my dad peppered the officers with questions about pressing charges and restraining orders. We should have known something was wrong, Mom kept saying. You've been so quiet lately, so anxious. We thought it was just stress from the Jake situation. But as we stood there in the parking lot watching Marcus's patrol car disappear, I realized this wasn't really over. Jake was still facing trial, and now Marcus would be too. There would be months of legal proceedings, testimony, probably more media attention. And I'd be at the center of all of it, the kid who brought down 2 community center employees in one summer. What if there are others? I asked Officer Martinez as she finished taking notes. Jake and Marcus were friends. What if other staff members blame me for what happened? She looked up from her notepad with a frown. What makes you ask that? I don't know, it just seems like every time I think this is finished, someone else comes after me. Officer Martinez exchanged a glance with my parents. We'll make sure the community center reviews their entire staff and security protocols. And we'll be recommending increased supervision for all employees who had contact with either Jake or Marcus. But as we drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something important. Marcus had mentioned Jessica facing harassment at school, Jake's brother getting kicked off the swim team. How many other people in Jake's orbit might blame me for the chaos that followed his arrest? The thought made my stomach churn with a new kind of dread. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with notifications. My stomach dropped, expecting more anonymous threats or harassment, but instead I found messages from people I barely knew, classmates, other community center members, even some adults. Heard what happened. You're brave for standing up to those creeps. My daughter mentioned Jake made her uncomfortable too. Thank you for speaking up. Saw the news about Marcus. Hope you're okay. You did the right thing. One message stood out from the rest. It was from Amy, the 13-year-old I'd watched Jake harass during swimming lessons. I wanted to tell my mom about Jake but was too scared. When you spoke up, it gave me courage to tell my story too. Thank you. I stared at that message for a long time, something loosening in my chest that I didn't even realize had been tight. For months, I'd been focused on my own humiliation, my own fear, my own need for justice. But seeing Amy's words made me understand something bigger. This had never been just about me. When I arrived at the community center that afternoon, Miss Thompson was waiting for me at the entrance. I tensed, half expecting another confrontation, but her expression was completely different from our last meeting. She looked tired, older somehow, but also relieved. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. A significant one. I let family loyalty cloud my judgment, and I failed to protect the people this facility is supposed to serve. Including you. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. I've submitted my resignation, she continued. The City Council is conducting a full investigation into management practices here, and they're implementing new policies for reporting harassment. Anonymous tip lines, mandatory training, regular staff evaluations. Things that should have been in place all along. She handed me an envelope. This doesn't make up for what you went through, but the board approved a full refund of your membership fees and a formal letter of apology. They're also offering counseling services if you'd like them. I took the envelope, but what I really wanted was to ask the question that had been haunting me. Do you think there will be others? Other people who blame me for Jake and Marcus getting arrested? Ms. Thompson was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. I think you'll find that most people are grateful someone finally stood up to bullies. The complaints have been pouring in since Jake's arrest, not about you, but about both of them. Parents, other staff members, even some of the regular adult swimmers. You weren't their only target, you were just the one brave enough to do something about it. When she left, I stood alone in the pool area for the first time in months without looking over my shoulder. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, turning the water into liquid gold. Sam, the replacement lifeguard, looked up from her textbook and waved casually before going back to her reading. I changed into my swimsuit and dove into the pool, and for the first time since this nightmare began, the water felt like home again. As I started my laps, I thought about Jake facing trial, Marcus in jail, the investigation uncovering who knows what other problems at the facility. But mostly, I thought about Amy finding her courage to speak up. About other kids who might swim here safely now. About standing up to bullies not just for revenge, but because sometimes one person's courage can protect everyone who comes after them. The water felt perfect, warm, welcoming, mine again. And finally, that was enough.